Welcome to rebuilding a Burnac Vulcan model steam engine toy. This is part 1, the introduction. What is it and where and why did I buy it? A look at the construction, then a test run using compressed air to see if it works, followed by taking it apart. I've already mentioned what it is. Where did I buy it? I bought it via the auction site that we all know and love. Why did I buy it? Because I like miniature steam engines. The reason for buying it is an attempt to show certain people how you should really restore model steam engines. It's not enough just to repaint them, you need to look a little deeper. These Burnac Vulcan engines were made from 1946 to 1949, I believe, in a place called Burslem, Stoke-on-Trent. The more I look at this very small steam engine, the more I like it. It is more or less in original condition. Although the inlet pipe to the steam engine is marked, it looks like the union nut has been removed recently. The general state of it could be described as horrible. But on the other hand, from what I can see, the general design is very good indeed. This is the burner and it's fairly devoid of any wicks. It's a bit rusty and past its best, but nevertheless it will clean up. This engine is older than I am. I was born in 1953, so this one predates the type of engines I had as a child, which were Mammods. And to be honest, I was never a big Mammod fan. I didn't like the way they were made. On the traction engine that I had as a child, I was fairly horrified when I saw that the axle for the back wheels went through the fire and got extremely hot. This is not a brass boiler, it's a copper boiler, but it does have brass end plates, and the entire engine looks to me to be well made. I don't like the water gauge, but you can't have everything. This I think is the later type of water gauge fitted to these models. The burner neatly fits in underneath. Just a simple 2-wick methylated spirit burner which should give plenty of heat for such a small engine. The safety valve, however, does have me puzzled. It's as though the threaded part isn't long enough. I'm sure there should be a spring on the threaded part, but there's hardly any thread at the bottom. However, I should be able to modify this to make it work perfectly. I don't think I need to buy a replacement. Some of the knurling is a bit chewed up on the bottom part where it screws into the boiler, but I can fix this as I have a knurling tool that will recut it. For now though, I'm putting it in the blue box, along with all the other parts I'm going to take off the engine. I really am curious to see, after all this time, whether it still works. So I've thoroughly oiled all the moving parts, supplied the engine with some very low pressure compressed air, and it ran beautifully. I really couldn't believe this. No trickery here, just listen to it, it's hardly making any noise. The timing is quite advanced on the cylinder porting, and it runs really well. I'm only supplying it with about 10 or 15 pounds per square inch, and it has some power. Anyway, that's enough fun for the time being. This is not going to sort itself out. I commenced disassembly by removing the union nut from the steam pipe. The way the steam pipe is fitted is quite interesting. The pipe itself goes down the hole in the fitting, then there's some graphited yarn or similar that's pushed against the fitting by the union nut. The large bolt is something I put in the hole. This actually has a throttle. The throttle valve was missing, but I think I can figure out how it works. The seller from whom I bought this engine via the auction site that we all know and love was not very good at all. Not only did it take a long time before he even posted it, I had to contact eBay, but when it arrived, the funnel was missing. And despite contacting the seller, I never received a reply or a funnel. With the engine, I did get some little machines that are designed to be driven by steam engines. One of them was a power hacksaw and that didn't work, and the other one was a fan, and both of them had plastic bases. Here I'm removing the flywheel. It's actually threaded onto the crankshaft and then locked in place with a lock nut on the end. Quite a nice touch. The paintwork's seen better days, so I'm not just going to paint over this with a brush, I'm going to remove it entirely, rub it down and respray it. This is not an expensive model, I actually paid too much for it, but I'm not bothered about that because it gives me an opportunity to show people how to successfully renovate things like this. Once I remove the flywheel, I then remove the spacer. What's interesting to me about the construction of this is that the frame that supports the flywheel and the crankshaft is made from brass, and so is the crankshaft. It's brass against brass, and looking at it closely, it seems to have worn over the years very well. Here's a spacer and the lock nut, both ready to go into the blue box. The trunnion pin on this engine is quite long, and so is the spring, which makes it a very easy job to pull the connecting rod off the crank pin without bending anything. When I look at the state of the piston, I'm quite surprised. It's in quite good condition. Similar to the crankshaft in the brass parts, it's hardly worn. I was already working on the idea of making a pair of phosphor bronze bushers and using a stainless steel crankshaft. But I have to keep sane on this one. It's a simple steam toy and I want to keep it that way. Here I'm removing the temporary bolt I put in the throttle hole. In this clip you can see the very long trunnion pin and also the very long spring. This is a very good design indeed. All good things must come to an end, so now it's out with the screwdriver, and I found a very small one, and when I get it to fit in the slot in the bolt, I can remove first one and then the other. This screwdriver, by the way, was in a Christmas cracker gift set, and I got quite a few at one time. And they've been surprisingly useful over the years. With both of the bolts removed, it's a simple job, or it should be, to just pull the pipe out of the top of the boiler and remove the entire assembly. This took longer than expected because the pipe was quite a tight fit in the threaded part. As I start to look more closely at the way this engine is built, I'm becoming increasingly impressed with the way it's manufactured. As I move the cylinder across the ports, it's very smooth indeed. And you can clearly see the inlet port to the cylinder and the outlet port to exhaust. This hole goes all the way through the block. It's not making any sense to me at all. But I'm sure when I have a really good look at it, I'll figure out how it works. I may modify this so the exhaust doesn't blow backwards against the boiler. More about this in a future episode. The next thing to look at is the water gauge. This, as I mentioned earlier, is the latest style, but it looks okay and it should do the job, although part of me is thinking, I wonder what a proper water gauge would look like sticking out of the side of this boiler. But I'm not going to get carried away. The first thing to do is to remove the bolts that hold this plate to the boiler. Once I'd removed both of the bolts, with a bit of persuasion, the part came away from the boiler. What did I find underneath it? A rubber block. And this rubber block was probably quite good in the 1940s, but now it's about as hard as a piece of concrete. If you look at the fitting that I'm holding in my right hand, you can see there's a piece of glass. The steel housing is a little bit rusty in places. I need to fix this. I'll use some JB Weld for that. Or I suppose I could remachine a part like this from a piece of brass. The piece of glass is intact though, and what I'm trying to do is remove it, but I don't think I'm going to be able to remove this without either destroying the glass or destroying the metal part that holds the glass. Initially, my thoughts are to work with what I've got. This is not going to be a sympathetic restoration because the item has negligible value. But when it's finished and working, it will look really nice in my display cabinet. Although there's quite a bit of work to do on this before I can even think about using it as a display model. But in my head, I can see the finished product. But first, it needs quite a lot of attention to get it into working order again. Some viewers may be thinking, well, why am I doing this? Because it didn't leak in the first place. Well, no, it didn't, but the glass was obscured by a black residue, so I wouldn't have been able to see the water level through it anyway. Here's what's left of the rubber on the bench. When I look closely at the base, I notice quite a lot of candle wax, red candle wax, so at some time in its life this has been powered by a red candle, and not by this small twin spirit burner. I'm going to change all that. I'm going to make it work again. The black residue on the inside of the piece of glass cleans off okay using a piece of Scotch-Brite. This is the chimney, and I don't know what's good about this chimney. There's just something good about it. It just sits on the fitting on the top of the boiler. There's going to be quite a bit of work required to make this engine look good and work well. And here's a shot of the underside of the base where it clearly says a Burnac product made in England. And that's it for the introduction. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.